As JDAI has inspired sites across the country to safely reduce pre-adjudication detention, so it's time to build upon your collaborative, your data-driven approaches to reduce juvenile incarceration and to transform juvenile justice into a system that can indeed pass the My Child test. This is not a responsibility solely assigned or solely undertaken by JDAI and this network in the room today. There are many projects underway now that are too lengthy for me to acknowledge, but colleagues at other foundations, from the Public Welfare Foundation to the MacArthur Foundation, the Sierra Health Foundation, the California Endowment, and organizations like Shea Bilczek Center at Georgetown University, the new National Center for Youth in Custody, are all beginning to focus intently on reducing the deep end of the system, and we're glad to join them and to explain to you today what our particular approach will be. So our plans for expanding the focus of the initiative to the deep end are reflected in this somewhat complicated diagram. And for those of you who have trouble following it or following me, let me assure you that there is a workshop discussion to take place after this morning's plenary session that'll give you the opportunity to ask lots of questions and ask Foundation staff about these plans. But the short answer to our overall design is that the work will go on 4 different levels in order to contribute to the current deinstitutionalization trend. First of all, and this is starting up here in the upper left-hand quadrant, as I noted, the recent deinstitutionalization trends reflect idiosyncratic changes in a large number of states. Those changes have yet to be effectively documented, much less communicated in ways that inspire either public confidence or political approval. So one clear strategy must be to mount a public awareness campaign that broadcasts these important trends, clarifies their results, shares lessons learned, and establishes the political will for deeper and more widespread reform. Attendees at this conference, by the way, will have an opportunity to discuss next steps for building such an advocacy campaign in a workshop tomorrow afternoon. So the first strategy is build public awareness for reducing reliance on incarceration. But as we've learned so clearly in JDAI, even the best policy advocacy and policy reform alone is rarely sufficient to change results for kids or for public safety. Policy reform must, in fact, be translated into practice. And that's why we devote so much attention to implementation issues, to not just changing policy, but to making policy changes work in practice. Now, when it comes to juvenile confinement, 2 realities ought to be acknowledged. The first is that at the state level, the rules are set. They're set through statute, they're set through regulation, they're set through funding arrangements. But it is at the local level, in the courts and probation agencies, for example, where those rules are actually implemented. So any substantial effort to reduce reliance on juvenile incarceration has got to address both of these realities. This year, we expect to identify up to 2 states where we will partner with the Pew Center on the States, which, if you haven't been following this, has made notable progress over the past 6 or 7 years, facilitating adult sentencing reforms in multiple states, to identify the primary drivers of youth incarceration and to promote policy reforms that can reduce unnecessary and inappropriate confinement. Our colleagues at Pew will take the lead on forming state-level policy reform groups to identify statutory and funding changes that can reduce such confinement. Our role will be to provide technical assistance to guide successful implementation of those policy changes. For those of you who wonder the types of changes that might be imagined at the state level, there will be a workshop on your agenda in which 3 states will discuss the kinds of changes that have happened at the state level and have dramatically reduced their reliance on incarceration. Work at the local level will proceed on 2 tracks. As we did with detention reform, we're going to identify a small number of places, probably cohorts of no more than 2 sites in each consecutive year, where intensive technical assistance and other forms of support can help to drive comprehensive reforms up and down the case processing continuum. What we hope to do is establish a cohort of sites that have not only minimized youth incarceration safely, but have been able to test the proposition that these reforms result in better long-term outcomes for system-involved youth. But we also recognize that there are far more JDAI sites now than our resources and capacities can satisfy that are interested in taking up this work already. To help them, we plan to establish a new infrastructure of tools and supports that can further your efforts without necessarily requiring large-scale investments. This is sort of going to be the do-it-yourself part of the work, as many of you currently do already. A new web-based technical assistance center will be established for these jurisdictions with tools that facilitate, for example, analysis of dispositional populations, that document best practices, that offer consultations on specific issues and challenges. Training seminars will be available to jumpstart your work on dispositional reform, and convenings like JDAI Inter-Site Conferences will be organized to build connections among peers and to exchange innovations and lessons learned.